I was so underfueled, it was ridiculous. I was just dragging. I didn't even know what being well fueled felt like. I just thought that I was terrible. No, you're starving yourself. You have literally no glycogen stores whatsoever. I was never eating when it was appropriate. I was eating the calories eventually, but I wasn't eating the calories when I needed them, so I had nothing to give in practice. And then my long distance running performances are, without even trying, a lot better now, being about 10 pounds heavier than I was. Why are we doing this to ourselves? Like, this makes no sense.
One of the biggest things I see a lot of folks could make a very easy improvement, and I think is the psychologically the most easy jump to make towards improvement of restriction patterns, is sort of battle that like inner voice to restrict, or maybe just lower calories are better, is prepping for a training session. And I think for me it's because I'm not actually consuming it right then and there. I know that I'll be consuming it over time, and I don't have to face the fact of taking it all in right now. And I don't know if that's part of it for you, but it's like it gives me time and space to make the intellectual, thoughtful decision. This is what's necessary and appropriate for the training session that I'm doing. What made it easiest for that to become sort of like where you're good?
I think it was just remembering the feeling strong versus feeling weak. I just appreciated I just focus on this right here. Like every time I dump a cup of sugar and 200 grams of carbs into my bottle, along with whatever else, sodium, other products I put in there, I think like this is the feeling of strength in my legs or arms. This is how I combat feeling weak, like I felt like I was most of my, high school and college experience.
So then why is it sometimes, what thoughts go through your mind during training that then sometimes make you, I would love to hear like a laundry list of all the thoughts that you've ever had that make you think, I'm not going to drink the hourly rate that I had previously planned to consume here?
It's usually really hard workouts where I perceive that I'm falling short in some way, where it's kind of like self-sabotage, where it's like, I'm not going to be able to hit this pace or this number that I wanted to be able to hit today. So I start almost self-sabotaging, like, you don't deserve to feel strong. You don't deserve to fuel yourself because you're falling off all your paces and you don't deserve these calories. Or it's really easy days where maybe I have to take down the intensity because of injury, or I'm just riding easy because, it's the prescribed easier day. I would say that those are probably two of the biggest ones. Or maybe in a race situation where, it's not going well for whatever reason, I might think like, what's the use? I'm so far back. It's just the lies that come into my mind. And I think it doesn't even matter. I'm not going to finish where I want to today. That's a little bit less common. Usually I'm a little bit more cutthroat and don't give up in races, but that's how I felt in the past. Now it's kind of like, I'm just going to keep slamming these carbs because maybe something will happen and I'll perform. In a race. Yeah. In a race, I'm usually a lot better because I care a lot and you never know what's going to happen in a race. But in training, it's where I struggle a little bit more. And I don't really have the thoughts that I'm not good enough in a race. I usually have the thoughts that I'm not good enough in training when I'm alone, because I train a lot alone. And I just have these thoughts like, I'm such an imposter. Like, what am I doing with my life? I'm trying to think other laundry list items. Honestly, if I'm in pain, like whether it's orthopedic pain or just pain from training, and I'm not really consciously focusing on fueling, I'll just be like, I don't want to make the extra effort to take a drink of something because...
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Pain like reduces your ability to think, and it already takes intentionality to like decide to fuel regularly. And like if you're in pain from physical effort, like you're just breathing hard, it's like a pain to like your heart rate's going to jump if you have to take a big gulp of your fluid.
I'm like, I'm already like on the borderline suffocating, because I'm at like threshold, or VO2 max, depending, and I don't want to take a drink of this because then I'm going to be really struggling to breathe, so.
Yeah. And you like, totally another Michelle expose moment. Like Michelle has like breathing issues, like you have asthma.
And vocal cord dysfunction. Which is where your throat tightens up.
Separate. Make that sound.
It's terrible. It's so attractive sounding.
It's fine, sweetheart. It's separate from your lungs. It's just right in here in your vocal cords. Yeah, it tightens up and limits the airflow that goes into your lungs. It has nothing to do with like the expansion of your bronchioles or anything like that with asthma. But both of those make breathing harder. And Dash wants to come say hello.
Hey, buddy, are you too hot? I know it's probably 100 degrees in here.
So your breathing issues make it like it's just another temptation for you, or another reason, very legitimate reason for you not to fuel, and that compounds with other reasons you might not fuel. All of those things compound to make it more likely that you get behind on your intended fueling rate for the day. And another expose, if I may, like you have swallowing problems too, right?
Yeah.
Like you experience
dysphagia,
GERD. Tell, maybe for the viewers, tell them what dysphagia is.
Yeah, dysphagia is just the sensation that you struggle to swallow. And this can happen, in people with GERD, which I have GERD. It's gastroesophageal reflux disease. And, a lot of people have that. Usually in eating disorder folks, it's the folks that have purged by vomiting that have these issues. I've never actually experienced that particularly, but I do have it for, other reasons. And so if I am breathing hard, I have vocal cord dysfunction, I feel like I can't breathe, I feel like I can't swallow. It's just like, I don't really feel like taking in some viscous, fuel source. I usually concentrate one bottle to make it really concentrated, and then I wash it down with plain water, but I just don't feel like swallowing anything. It's just like, like I can take a couple more pedal strokes or a couple more steps or a few more strokes or do one more lap before I take in some fuel or one more interval.
Or climb one more hill.
Yeah.
Get to the top of the hill.
Right. I'll wait. Exactly. Until I'm descending or something.
Yeah.
Or,
and then, the descent is fast and it's a little windy.
Yeah. It's like there's
not
always
gonna
an
fuel
excuse.
here.
Always an excuse. But you just have to overcome and make the hard choice.
And I would say, I ride a lot of her rides with her, behind her. But when I'm with her, I have seen a lot of these things take place, and I'm like, I glance down and see where her carb bottle's at, and I look at the watch, and it's been 2.5 hours, and she's like consumed an hour's worth of fuel, and I'm like, this is bad. This is going to turn into a really bad ride really fast. And I ask her like, hey, could you drink now, or do you think you should take in some carbs now? And there are legitimate excuses. She's like having swallowing problems, or like she has gastrointestinal upset, possibly because of mismanaging the fuel in the first place. But if you just have an upset
stomach, water,
stomach,
or just lack of planning, or there's so many reasons, for that. But.
And fueling endurance stuff, it gives you so many opportunities to mess up fueling that, like, if you have any tendency, like emotionally or mentally, to like make choices that might further compound them, like endurance fueling is going to bite you, because there are so many ways you can mess it up, and there's only a few ways to get it really right, and that's to have your hydration managed, to have your carbs and sodium managed. And if you get behind, like your gastrointestinal tract, your stomach starts to work less well, your intestines start to work less well, and then you have very real reasons to need to restrict because your stomach hurts and you're gonna like have diarrhea or cramps or whatever.
It's also important too, when you have multiple training sessions per day, if you underfuel the first one, the second one's gonna feel terrible, and maybe even the next day it's gonna feel terrible too. So yeah, I've definitely experienced that, multiple times.
I would say my coaching advice for a person who thinks that they might be finding reasons to restrict during training is to identify the triggers that you have towards restriction, like whether it's the descents are a little sketchy for you, don't want to drink during a descent.
Bottle leaks and you get Gatorade all over your hands and it's disgusting.
Yeah. You got a leaky bottle, you don't want to touch your bottle, get a new bottle.
Yeah.
If you don't want to drink while you're climbing because your heart rate's high and you know that's going to give you worse GERD, or it's going to just make your GI respond poorly to your intake, fuel before the climb while your heart rate's a little lower. Find all of your reasons that you've ever given yourself or anybody else for not fueling, tackle them, and then whenever one of those reasons isn't present, that's when you should be fueling.
Yeah. It needs to be a constant thought, just like when you have disordered eating, it's a constant thought to figure out how you're going to get away with continuing those behaviors. You need to have it constantly in your mind, like, how can I get this fuel in my body? When is it going to work?
Yeah, when's the next possible time?
Exactly.
What other things have you thought on the bike as reasons for maybe I need less fuel today? We talked about power, if your power's low.
Executing the workout poorly. Oh, I mean, if there are gummy bears at home and I want to just slam those,
I would categorize that.
Or frozen yogurt or something, I don't know.
No, that's really good. I would categorize that as the satiety management argument that folks with restrictive tendencies tend to use a lot, and it's a very good one because you have experienced hunger. You've experienced wanting to manage your hunger the best possible way that you know how, which is to eat more food volume. And instead of drinking your food, your calories on the bike, like you're like, if I can just restrict a bit now, then I get to eat that tasty food that I've been longing for,
Yeah.
or I can just eat more food volume off the bike, which in many cases is a really good idea. Like if you have very real weight management issues and satiety management is a thing that you need to be concerned with, that may apply, but for you, that doesn't necessarily apply. You can fuel aggressively on the bike and still get all the food that you want. Tell me how that thought process of satiety management on the bike affects, or like desires for future foods that you might have. How does that affect fueling?
It doesn't as much anymore, but back when I was, consuming 40 grams of protein total for the day, and that's like in sources from like bread or carbohydrate sources. It was basically I was eating only carbohydrates and would get some fat in those carbohydrates and some protein in those carbohydrates. I do not recommend this. We have been guinea pigs for a lot of different nutrition and training strategies, but
It's true.
yeah, I just remember thinking like, man, I just really want to have a sandwich, and if I drink this Gatorade, I'm not going to be able to have a sandwich when I get home. I don't think that anymore now. I pretty much just do whatever I want. I just fuel and then eat literally whatever I want when I get home, and it's fine.
Good to know. When during your training sessions would you report that you are sort of saving calories for later?
Oh, probably during late luteal phase for me, because that's when bloating happens most substantially. I have just more negative emotions.
That's actually a really good point.
Yeah, I would say that late luteal phase for me personally, training's a struggle. I restrict calories, which again makes training a struggle. Motivation to train is low. You're achy, you feel like garbage. Yeah, I would say that is probably when I'm the most likely to restrict calories, because I just generally feel more negative about everything.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do anything.
So for the guys out there that don't have luteal phases or even maybe know what that is, that's a phase of the hormone cycle for women. But it sounds like in general, if you're having negative emotions or negative feelings,
it's like we're not fueling. We're
physical
just,
feelings at all.
Yeah.
You're like more likely to use, or if you're feeling bad about your body.
Yeah, you're just like feeling
it's
bloated. You're retaining water. You're like constipated. You're aching. I get headaches. Just every woman is a little different, but it's just like, man, I don't want to fuel this.
Like I'd rather have ice cream when I get home instead of my slurry on the bike.
For sure. It's just like I'm sick and tired of the same overly sweet flavor. And with a little salt in there, I just want something better.
That was an amazing answer to a question that I worded poorly. I actually didn't mean to ask that question. I'm so glad that you went there, because honestly, that's really valuable information. I'm going to re-ask the question much more clearly.
Okay.
When within a single training session, like during the beginning, middle, end, during a certain hard portion, easy portion, when do those thoughts of I'm going to save calories for later come in within a training session?
I have a problem with adding distance to my runs or rides a lot, and sometimes my swims.
As in you don't like to?
No, I do. Oh. I do like to add volume. So I'll be like, I'm feeling great. I'm going to add another couple hours to my ride, or I might like add, I don't know, like 6 more miles or something to my run. And then I'm like, oh shoot, I don't have enough carbs for that. Like I better like ration them out, or I'm not going to make it, and that's terrible. If I'm adding volume, assuming I don't have like injury problems, which I do, I would just stop somewhere and get more carbs and more water. I'd refuel somewhere, or I would just actually follow the training program.
That never happens.
That never happens. Let's be honest. But yeah, I think I ration it out a lot, because I think to myself, like, okay, if I'm going this way, there's going to be a big climb, and it's going to take me an hour to get up that climb. And then I have, another hour I'm going somewhere else. So if I drink all my carbs now, I'm going to have major hypoglycemia by the end of the ride. And I don't want that. I'd rather have like just be under fueled than have like major hypoglycemia, because then for me personally, as a person with low blood pressure, if I feel hypotensive and hypoglycemic, it gets to the point where it's like I might need to lie down on the side of the road. I've been there before. I've been sitting on the side of the road thinking like I think I'm dying. So yeah, I would say that's probably
So maybe for you it doesn't have so much to do with like any certain time of the workout. It has more to do with like if you think you might go
I'm like,
longer,
I'm probably going to add some volume.
you're just going to ration. You have like this rationing problem.
Yes. And so this is another thing, is I do two things. I wear my clear sunglasses on the bike if I think there's a chance I might be riding into the night. And then I also bring extra carbs. And so sometimes I come home with a bottle that's not all the way empty, because I concentrated the heck out of that.
Yeah.
Because I thought that there was a chance I might be adding, a few hours. to the ride.
So it sounds like before the ride.
So sometimes it looks like, wow, you're really under fueling. I'm like, well, there's actually 700 grams of carbs and they're not 300 or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
350.
So it sounds like before the ride really is your strength, where you're like, I'm gonna put more than I need, or at least as much as I need in this bottle, because like I might go longer. Yeah, I might just be having a ball out there.
Yeah, and that does happen. Typically, when I'm not injured, that does happen kind of a lot. So. Yeah,
I'll share that for me, I tend to do this like restriction of fuel intake during rides. Even on rides, I know for sure I'm going to need to fuel maximally for what my gut can handle if I'm going to have a good performance throughout the ride. Like if I'm going to go try to ride 4 hours in like a strong zone 2, like the end of that is going to start to suck, even with good fueling. I still have the tendency personally to, in the first hour, I'm like, I can get away with a little bit less because I just ate a big meal a couple hours ago. My blood sugar is still elevated. Maybe the caffeine's still coursing because I just took it like 30 minutes to an hour ago. Like I just feel great. Okay, I'll do like 50 to 60 grams of carbs this first hour. And then at the end of the ride, I fall into that category of like, or that thought process of like, if I don't consume these 50 grams of carbs, maybe I can lose that little bit of belly fat, still lose that little bit of belly fat, and still also get that really tasty meal that I want after training. And that's such a bad habit to get into when I'm already suffering on the bike. I'm just like, I'll just suffer more. Now, I don't take my training nearly as seriously as you do, or as like most endurance athletes do. I don't have a training program. It's totally haphazard. And so to a certain extent, I get away with it because like I'll take a day off the next day or 2 days off, like because I'm not that serious. But I know for a fact that my clients, because I've seen their power drift at the end of their zone 2 rides, and then they tell me they're fueling and it's the exact same pattern that I personally exhibit. I know that there's a pattern in that first hour. People are like, I can make it. I feel great. I don't need to fuel. And then they start fueling in the second hour, and then they really fuel the third hour. And then towards the end, they're like, either have GI distress or they're thinking about satiety management, and they taper off their fueling and their performance also fades. And I've seen that with you too, I think. I don't know, maybe you're not even aware. I've seen I've seen your first bottle, your carb bottle, stay 100% full for an hour.
Yeah, I totally do that. Absolutely, 100%. The first hour, I think, is, again, in training, if it's just like an easier ride, I'm really guilty of this. I just feel fine, I don't need it. And then I'm like, oh shoot, by hour 2, I'm like, I'm really like not executing this well, and so I'll try to catch up. And then, I totally do that sometimes at the end of rides too, especially the rides where it's I'm not finishing strong. If it's just like a low aerobic ride, very, very guilty of this. If it's a ride where I'm trying to accomplish X amount of miles as fast as I can, or it's some sort of like an interval workout or something like that, I usually don't. At the end, if I'm finishing, a race or a hard interval workout or some sort of hard effort, I will finish my nutrition because I have these feelings of I didn't come this far just to like screw everything up by not finishing my fuel. But if it's an easy ride, I'm like, I can limp home, it's fine, which is not ideal. And I wouldn't recommend it, but I definitely am guilty of that. Especially if I have a second session, I've definitely had that thought, and then the second session feels horrible. I'm like, I messed up again. Like, okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's where I've seen it bite you and me and lots of my clients is that feeling of it's an aerobic or recovery ride. I don't need to fuel all the way to the end so that I can have that solid food, or I can have a bigger meal afterwards. I get to just eat more of my calories, but I have a second session and I really needed that glycogen, and now my second session is awful. And I want to add also that I have even read and heard some coaches recommend that you don't actually need that much fuel in the first hour. And I understand the thought process. It's wrong, but I understand the thought process is you've consumed a big bolus of food beforehand. You've got a lot of carbs in your system. They're in your stomach, they're in your small intestine, they're being titrated into the bloodstream. So your blood sugar is already elevated, and that can sustain you for the first hour. The problem with that is you will actually, as soon as you start exercising, you'll have a dip in your blood sugar, regardless of how much is in your stomach, unless you did something really silly and consumed like a gigantic meal 90 minutes before. But if you do what lots of coaches recommend, sort of like the dogmatic recommendation is eat 2 to 3 hours before, 100 carbs, 80 carbs, 150 carbs, some large amount of carbs, 2 to 3 hours before, and then like ramp up your fueling towards the end of the first hour and then really get into your fueling in the second, third, fourth hour of a long ride. And that is an absolute recipe for getting behind on your fueling to the extent that your blood sugar drops. And you can be packing in more carbohydrate into your stomach and intestine tolerably in that first hour to better fuel the second hour, the third hour, the fourth hour. And your fourth hour will be better because you fueled that first hour.
You're also training your gut too. Like if you force yourself to, if you fuel hard, your gut's going to be more able to absorb more on those hard days when you need it. So
absolutely. Earlier you mentioned something to me about an all or nothing mentality, and that you wanted to talk about that. Make sure we touched on that in this video. Tell me how an all or nothing mentality affects your decisions to fuel, eat.
Yeah, so being like a type A person or a perfectionist, I feel like either I'm on the training plan or I am failing. Like I'm either executing the training plan perfectly or I don't want to be on a training plan at all. And nutrition kind of falls into that. I feel sometimes like I'm failing the workout if I'm not fueling well, and so that's kind of like a good thing in a way. Not really, but it's better. But in the past, when I was trying to restrict really hard, I had like, this is how many grams of protein I'm going to get per day. This is the max grams of carbs I'm going to get per day. And this is the fat amount that I'm going to get per day. If I was eating more than that, I felt mentally and emotionally soft. I felt like a failure, and I felt like a soft, kind of pathetic athlete. I felt like maybe my training was going well. I was super gritty in the training, but I felt like I was just a softie. And I was ashamed of myself for not being able to stick with the nutrition along with the training. And this was really, really bad when I first got into triathlon. And triathlon's super hard. Like we don't need to make it any harder than it already is. But truly, it was almost like a badge of honor for how like mentally tough, how strong you could be. I can suffer deep in training, but I can suffer deeper in starvation. So I think that like I remember having like great training sessions, but then I would eat more calories, or I couldn't sleep at night because I was so hungry, or my body was aching in the night, or I just was wake up because I would have dreams about food. I remember having dreams about like licking syrup off of like walls of a house because I was so hungry. And I would get up and I would, eat something like an apple or a banana. And I would just go to bed feeling like so guilty. I'm like, I ruined everything.
So you're saying you would feel like you took away from your training the hardness of your training.
Yeah. It's like I am no longer tough. I'm no longer strong. Like I am no longer succeeding. Because now I'm going to be too heavy to run well. I'm not going to be lean. I'm not going to have those lower ab like vascularity or striations. I have heard this from other people as well. Like I have a few clients that have voiced this to me too, where even if their training is going great, but if they eat extra calories, it's all ruined. And I'm like, man, like who cares about the calories? Like if you eat extra calories, your training's going great and you're healthy and you're strong. And so it's great. But I definitely understand that mentality of it's all or nothing. It's either I am 100% tough as nails and miserable and suffering, or I am a failure.
Absolutely.
So.
And I see that even at less extreme levels, really broadly in the whole triathlon, the whole running community.
Yeah.
It's this association of toughness in training, toughness restriction with diet. There are whole diet movements that have spawned successfully from this because it gives people another way to feel tough, to feel like they're doing everything they can, they're managing everything, and they are hard as nails in both their training and their diet. They restrict all of this one nutrient, or they restrict to only this type of foods or this particular diet plan, and they are hard.
Yeah.
But then almost always folks break from that, or they're just like pretty unhappy and like really self-critical. Physiology is powerful. It's really hard to overcome your physiology. Your physiology is going to demand that you eat the thing.
Yeah. Or like you said, you're going to burn out. I mean, your longevity in the sport is going to be greatly diminished if you're pushing yourself that hard. Like, I mean, triathlon's super hard and running is super hard, cycling's super hard. I mean, endurance sports in general are super hard by nature. And so when you are pushing your body that hard and then you also are punishing yourself by not fueling, it just makes it, I mean, honestly, I think it makes it 3 times as hard.
Oh, at least, yeah. Totally. And I can see how a person would think, like, oh, I'm being soft by fueling all the things, because honestly, it makes it a lot easier. Like,
It does.
you can
It
go
does.
do crazy training
Yeah.
sessions.
Like, have the
If you
pizza with the
fuel.
cheese on it. I mean, remember when I took the order pizza without cheese because I just wanted the carbs? I mean, that is stupid. Like, you just ran 14 miles of intervals and you went on a 3-hour bike ride. It's okay to have a piece of pizza with some cheese on it. Like,
Or half a pizza with some
yeah,
cheese on it.
it's like, I know exactly, but yeah, it actually makes the sport, like endurance sports, not just so hard, but it makes it, I don't want to say torture because that's too far, but it makes it,
It is torture. Being hypoglycemic and being forced to go through intervals is really I mean, it's not like literal torture,
yeah,
but
no,
it is really
but
hard.
it makes it so much harder, and it makes it, I think it kind of takes the joy out of it. I mean, I love suffering. Like, I love it. I love the pain that comes along with hard efforts. I just relish in suffering. You can suffer so much deeper in training if you fuel appropriately,
Yes.
rather than just useless suffering. You might as well make the suffering productive so you can race faster than just suffer in silence and then perform like garbage. That's just my opinion.
Totally. That's part of why I'm so passionate about this topic and nutrition in general, especially nutrition in endurance sports, because I think that the reason wide swaths of the population believe that endurance sports suck and aren't for them, the reason people don't believe they can be a marathoner or they can be a triathlete, or they just don't like it, they mock endurance sports, I almost guarantee you, like, I won't put a number on it, a huge percentage of those folks hate endurance sports because they are misfueling or underfueling.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
when you are larger, like me, I'm 208 pounds, relatively muscular guy, a lot of the folks that make fun of endurance sports they look a lot like me.
Or me too.
Or even you,
Yeah.
like, you're pretty muscular, you know?
Like-
The reason I'm so passionate about endurance nutrition is because I think if more people hear how they're supposed to actually fuel their training, we will have more people enjoying something that they would have otherwise enjoyed deeply.
He's dreaming.
Our dog is yipping in his dreams. Dash, wake up, buddy. Dasher. Yeah, you're okay. Now stay over there. But
He was trying to run in his dream. He's probably,
our dog is a runner.
yes.
I truly believe that there are a lot of people in gyms lifting weights that would love endurance sports and have the personality types that would love endurance sports if they knew how to fuel and if they thought that fueling was acceptable. And I think there's a lot of people missing out on something that would bring them a lot of joy in life. That's why I'm so passionate about endurance nutrition. Yeah, teaching people that it's not just ultra endurance folks, not just triathletes that need proper intra-workout fueling, but anybody doing endurance can benefit from being thoughtful about the fuel they give themselves. I want to give the viewers a takeaway on something that they can take away if they think that they are struggling with restrictive eating. Hit me with some takeaways that they might be able to use to improve their disordered eating patterns. Like, what has been useful for you?
I think the biggest one, like what we talked about before, I had to consciously choose to engage in what was the most terrifying to me. So instead of running from the weight gain, I actively pursued it. And it wasn't like I just let my weight drift up. It was like, no, I was force feeding myself to gain weight. Do I think that's necessary? No, but that actually did work really well for me because I was eating healthy foods. I wasn't force feeding myself, cake and ice cream to gain weight. I was eating, like chicken and vegetables and rice and that type of thing. I kind of got to the point where I realized, okay, this is pretty much as far as I can reasonably gain. So even if I'm out of control with my nutrition, I'm not gonna, if I'm eating relatively healthy, I'm not going to end up being, 800 pounds, which I thought I would because I loved food. And then I realized, like, when I was at the peak of my weight, I realized that, I still had people that cared about me. I didn't feel like I was alone in the world. I think that was my fear, that I would be isolated if I was heavy. Like, people would hate me for some reason. And I have no idea why I thought that, but I did think that. Yeah, nothing really changed. I just got better at my sport and I felt physically better. I had the opportunity to buy some new clothes, which I hadn't bought new clothes in years. So I'm like, sweet, it was kind of like a win-win-win situation. So that was a big thing that helped me. So I think figuring out what it is that you fear and then facing that and then realizing that it's actually not as bad as you think, that's useful. Also, I think just forcing yourself to fuel. If you are more motivated to lose weight because you think you're going to be better at your sport, try fueling appropriately, especially during your training, and see how it affects your performance, because you probably will find out that you actually are performing a lot better. The very worst, the exact same, but you might just feel better at all the other times of the day. I think that would be a good strategy as well. I hesitate to make too many specific recommendations because there is a lot of psychological baggage root causes for a lot of different disorders, and that needs to be addressed. So I don't want to say do X, Y, and Z and that'll cure you, because it's a lot more complicated than that. Just like you wouldn't say, oh, every person who has type 1 diabetes, you got to try this particular type of insulin.
Yeah.
You don't just recommend that without knowing what their medical history is, knowing what medications they're on, knowing what they've done before, knowing the experiences they've been through, knowing what works and doesn't work. It's just anything clinical. It's more of a, you should take it more case by case rather than just making global statements or recommendations, because I don't think that that's best practice. I think that you should get to know the person and really discuss and dive into what their actual issues are before you make specific recommendations.
Yeah.
Because even two people that have moderate anorexia are going to require different interventions.
That makes sense.
And it's not just an RD that would, make those recommendations and that would be treating that patient. It's also a therapist and also, doctors. So it's a lot more complicated than just saying, oh, you got this problem? All right, check out my 3 steps and you're fixed. Like, that's not the way it works. I wish it was. That'd be awesome. But
yeah, that makes sense.
It's more like
totally individual.
Yeah.
What have been some of your personal thought processes or strategies or experiences that have been the most impactful or are today the most useful
for the treatment of myself?
Yeah, just for yourself.
Well, first of all, I think that there are both physiological and environmental factors that play into eating disorders in general. And for me, I think it was a good combination of both. But I think that for me, being able to work on my mental health just in general helped.
Like, how have you done that?
Yeah, well, I think I just needed to recognize that I had worth as a human. I know that sounds crazy, but I went through a large period of my time where I did not feel like I had worth as a human. I thought that I was literally a waste of air. Actually, people say that and it's kind of like an exaggeration. Yeah. I actually felt like that for a very long time. And so I think that, first of all, just getting that taken care of will help you to think, well, I'm worthy of being alive, so maybe I'm worthy of fueling my body appropriately rather than just trying to wither away into thin air, basically. That sounds really bad, but that's the reality of the situation.
I just want to say something to you. If you're watching, you are worth it as a human, and you are worth it as a human.
I thank you.
I'm trying really hard to keep my wall up so that I don't tear up. So go ahead and continue.
So let's say that you physiologically are predisposed to have some sort of disordered eating. There might be different triggers or environments that you might be in that may help those eating disorders take off. Like some people that are not genetically predisposed might be in the exact same environment, same household, same school, same whatever. It doesn't affect them at all. But there are certain things that predispose you. Like for females, this is not a comprehensive list, but it might be that they are surrounded by people that have anxiety or depression or some sort of neuroticism, perfectionism themselves. They're constantly criticizing themselves or other people, or there's a little bit of chaos around them, or there was some sort of trauma that happened. And then with boys, the same thing, but also bullying seems to be a trigger for a lot of male clients, at least that I've seen.
Like that they were bullies or that they were
No,
bullied?
they were bullied by someone.
Got
Yeah,
it.
they were. I mean, bullies, of course, they have their own set of issues that are stemming from problems that they had at some point too. But I'm saying if somebody is bullied, what I've read and what I've seen seems to affect them too. And they might have body dysmorphia disorder or develop body dysmorphia disorder, thinking that they're either too undermuscled or too fat. I don't think I've personally seen any guy that thought they were over muscled, but I'm sure that does occur. I have not personally seen that. So I think that really recognizing that maybe you were genetically predisposed to this is great, but then also identifying certain environmental triggers that may have caused you to kind of spiral out of control, actually challenging those things. Is this reality?
Is this reality now?
Yeah, exactly.
Versus what was reality then?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point too. Maybe something was reality in the past, but maybe it's not relevant anymore, or maybe it was never reality ever. It was just the way that you were perceiving something. Because another thing is oftentimes people that have disordered eating are a little bit more sensitive. Two people could be bullied equally.
Absolutely.
One kid, develops BDD, another kid does not.
Yeah.
Or
and what's BDD?
body dysmorphia disorder.
Okay.
Or somebody or two girls, for example, or I should just say kids, youth, people, could be in an environment where a parent just constantly talking badly about the way that they look or the way that somebody else looks. And one kid is like, I don't care. And then the other kid's like, oh shoot, I don't want to be useless and worthless. So I better, not be like those people that this other person's talking badly about.
For sure.
These are just examples. There are tons and tons of triggers.
That example that you just gave is one of the most common that I've seen among my clients.
Me too.
The hypercritical parent that is critical both of and themselves. They're just really critical. Definitely is a strong trigger.
And of course, there's other things too, like trauma that happens as an adult, or, there's so many different things that could cause this, but I'm just talking about the ones that I've seen most commonly.
Yeah.
So
what else have you done? So you've basically said like recognizing your own, where it stemmed from for you.
Yeah.
Is a good one for you. And then tackling the things that you have feared head on. Like you've feared fat gain, you've feared weight gain.
Yeah.
And you've gone through those things and seen that your husband, fiance at the time still loved you.
And just everybody.
And everybody
it's not like I just, my friends didn't want to be friends with me anymore.
Nothing changed.
It's like literally nothing changed. I just needed to buy some new clothes. I'm like, yeah, it's fine.
And it's very easy for me to sit here and say, yeah, nothing changed, duh. But for you, like...
It was mind-blowing. Like...
Yeah.
People don't hate me for some reason. It was like a very weird
You still
thing
have
because
value.
I think a lot of people unfortunately tie their self-worth into their body composition or their sport performance or whatever else they're doing rather than just recognizing that they have inherent worth. And that's so cliche. It's cliche for a reason.
It's really true. So those are some bigger picture things. What else have you done like day to day?
Wish I could say that I trained at the same time every day, but I don't. Our lives are pretty variable since we live in an RV and we travel, and so schedules change a lot. But I think that just knowing that this is how much I need for each training session, like fuel wise, that's been really helpful. And then just knowing that I'm going to plan ahead and give myself the opportunity to fuel well because I've planned ahead has been really useful.
You decided to get more intentional with your intra workout fueling.
Oh yeah. I'm trying to think of other things. I really think for me personally, it was just taking classes on nutrition and learning more. The more I learned personally, the more I realized that I was doing a disservice to my own health and performance, like a huge disservice, and that it was like I was never going to reach the heights of my athletic potential if I didn't fuel, and I really wanted to be a good athlete, so that helped. Yeah, I would say that for me, just learning more, like going through grad programs with a lot of classes on sport nutrition and then getting my RD was really useful as well, because I learned obviously a lot about food.
Okay, so I'm gonna be a psychologist, which I have no training in whatsoever. Zero training. I took a sports psychology class 10 years ago.
Did you?
Yeah, sports psychology 10 or 301 or whatever it was, or 309
cool.
something.
Good to know.
I don't
Back
remember.
when you thought sports psychology was useless? Yeah.
Back when I thought sports psychology was
Or psychology in
garbage.
general was useless? I remember you saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been wrong a lot in my life.
The more we learn, the more we realize we know nothing, so.
Yes. So here I go into psychology land.
Okay.
With no training. I want to get more granular.
Okay.
What mental things do you do today? You are talking about like the big picture, like I learn a lot about nutrition, but that sounds like a thing that you did over years or months or many weeks. What little things, if anything, you said one of the little things that you do every day is prep your training.
Yeah.
Like you prep your nutrition for your training as like sort of your number one thing that you do. And you hinted at maybe if we had a schedule that would be useful.
Yeah, it'd be great if like I knew the pool was going to be open at the same time every day, if we lived in like one place, that would be great. But you never know.
You never know when you live in an RV and might move tomorrow.
Exactly. It's like if you go to a new town, it's like you don't even know where the pool is. Do they have one? Hopefully, or will I be swimming in a lake? So you just don't know. So I think that would be useful.
So for some folks, scheduling might be useful. Planning for the training sessions by prepping your nutrition for the training sessions might be useful as like to give yourself a chance to succeed in that training session. So is there anything else granular, day-to-day, little tiny logistical things that you do or think about that have improved your experience with regard to food, restriction, anorexia, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think I just honestly knowing what I need for each training session's really helped. And then just understanding, like having a concept of what will happen today if I fail to fuel my first training session, or what will happen today if my breakfast is non-existent or terrible or just too tiny.
Yeah.
I guess I've gotten to the point now, maybe because I'm in my 30s calories and I just don't care anymore. Like, I would rather be a better athlete and feel physically good than perform like garbage and look a certain way, because honestly, it doesn't matter. Like, I just don't really care anymore. If I need to buy another pair of pants because mine are too small, it's like, I'll just do that. And so I think that part of it is that I just don't care anymore as much about what people think of me. I'm just like, I would rather be like a kind person who cares about people and be seen as like a hard worker than, wow, that person has striated delts. Like, I don't care like anymore, I think. And I think part of that's just age, but I honestly,
maybe maturity.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of maturity too, I don't know, but I think, yeah, I would rather be a good athlete who's thick than shredded mediocre athlete, I guess.
Yeah. So you've made it basically more about your athletic performance and more about who you are and where your value comes from, rather than how you look.
I'm not an athlete. I do sports, I'm not an athlete. Being an athlete is not who I am. I just do that.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time doing that.
Like, being an athlete isn't what defines you as a person.
For sure. Like,
your value.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do think that, if I'm being 100% honest, I think that the shift has come from not restricting calories, but more so I must do more training. And so I do think that there has been a bit of a shift in like that neuroticism, whereas before I was restricting calories. Now I'm not really doing that anymore as much, but I'm like, I have to do more volume. I have to do more training. I have to put in more hours. I have to put in more work. I do think that it's easy to kind of have your neuroticism or your disorder kind of shift to other areas of your life.
Good to pay attention to.
Yeah, that's a work in progress. So, and I do think that there's a difference now as well, because before I would purge with exercise. I would eat a big meal of something and then I would go to the gym for 4 hours, whereas now I actually plan the big event and then carb load like it's my job before the event. So it's more healthy, I think.
Yeah.
It's an appropriate approach rather than using exercise as punishment. I'm like stoked about the exercise coming up and then I fuel for that. But I do think that I have neurotic tendencies still, where if the workout isn't perfect or if I'm not doing more volume or whatever it is, I do have a tendency to be hard on myself still, which is something I'm working on.
Which is awesome. It's awesome that you're intentionally working on it. You mentioned that one of the things that has benefited you is that you've learned like what it feels like to feel bad in training and what it feels like to feel good in training.
Yeah.
But there was a time when you didn't have a perspective of what it was like to feel good in training, because you had literally never done the nutrition well enough to feel good in training. The reason I bring that up is I have lots and lots, actually almost every endurance client I've ever had come to me has that same pattern. I would say maybe 5 to 10% of my clients don't fall into this category. So 90% do. They have this pattern, or they have this experience that they've never actually known what feeling good in training even is. And when they finally nail their nutrition and actually just increase everything to appropriate amounts, they're like, I didn't know you could feel this good in training.
Yeah, I totally can relate to that, and I've heard that so many times. My swim was great, or like my ride was great today, or run, or whatever. It's like, yeah, that's the way it should feel every day. Yeah, I totally understand that. Like, all of high school and college, I did not know what it felt like to actually be fueled. Like, now, if I felt like that now, I would think, oh my gosh, I felt horrible today.
Yeah.
That was so
like
terrible.
Your experiences from the past were terrible, but your only perspective from back then was terrible, very terrible, and even more terrible. And so terrible felt pretty darn good, or pretty acceptable.
Yeah, for sure. And I just thought, I'm just not a good athlete, like not great at this.
I'm telling you, most of the world is in that category right now.
I agree. Yeah.
If people could understand that it was good and acceptable to fuel with carbohydrates, even if they're unfit, even if it's an easy day, especially if they're unfit.
And sodium and fluid appropriate.
Yeah.
For those of us that have hypotension and sweat a lot.
For sure.
Or sweat a lot.
If you're unfit and new to this, that doesn't mean you need less calories. It actually means you probably need more carbs during training, because you're less efficient and you're burning more. And I mean, I'm telling you, like, the world of endurance sports would explode if this was just automatic knowledge to everybody that how good they could feel during training with good fueling. How did you in endurance sports stumble into, this is what good fueling feels like during my training? What was the first time you did that? Or maybe a big one that you remember?
I honestly don't think I started fueling truly appropriately until I started cycling. When I had that hip injury and I wasn't able to do tri for a while, and I kind of stepped away from it because I was exhausted with starvation.
So when you say when you started cycling, you mean cycling?
Competitively cycling.
Cycling as a sport, not in triathlon.
Yes.
And the reason she wouldn't have taken her cycling fueling super seriously when she was in triathlon was because
I did sprints.
you did sprints
Mainly.
and super sprints, and cycling at the pro level in sprints and super sprints is less important because all you have to do is be able to hang in a peloton.
You just sit there and you can do like no watts, and then you just have to swim fast, make the peloton,
Yeah.
sit there and do nothing in the cycling leg, and then you run fast.
And you happen to be gifted in cycling, and so back when you were training for triathlon, it was like you got to swim 5 or 6 sessions a week. You need to run
More, really, I
three-
should have been swimming like
3 to 5 sessions of running a week, and then like I was trying to convince you just not to ride the bike at all because literally you could show up any day of the
which
week.
is no fun.
Which is no fun, of course. But the point is, you never did any long cycling training
Yeah.
sessions. So it wasn't until you actually started cycling as a sport that you did long cycling training sessions for the purpose of training, rather than
Well, I
the
did that
occasional
one
fun.
100-mile ride,
For
but,
sure.
But yeah,
it was
that
just
was
a
just
fun-
for fun. Yeah.
But so your first cycling training sessions where you actually thought, I'm doing this for the purpose of enhancing my sport performance. I'm riding my bike to make myself better at sport.
Yeah.
That happened when you were now cycling as a cyclist.
Yeah.
So take me through the first time, or give me the first memory that you have of what appropriate fueling felt like compared to inappropriate fueling.
I don't think I fueled my first stage race as a Cat 4 very well. I want to say it wasn't until 2019, honestly, where I started fueling well. Basically, we were doing these races or we had the schedule where I would do a stage race in Arizona, and then I would get in the RV, and then we would drive to NorCal, and then I'd do another race the next day, and then I would do another race the next day back in Arizona, and we would just drive all over the country. And I was so tired because I was only getting like 4 hours of sleep some nights because we were driving, and he was getting like no sleep. I remember thinking like, I have to make up for this lack of sleep somehow, so I've got to slam some calories. And I just remember like basically making the cycling races like an eating competition, and I realized like, wow, I can actually kind of tolerate like a lot per hour. You know, you were encouraging me to do that, and I remember thinking like, this is the only way I'm going to survive, because I wanted to upgrade as fast as possible.
And in cycling, upgrade means move up categories. They have 5 categories, Cat 5 all the way up to Cat 1, which is like the national level best competitors, and your goal was to move from Cat 5 to Cat 1 as soon as possible.
Yeah,
Like
and-
within a year. And so
Yeah.
you were like, I got to do this.
Yeah, so we were traveling, and I was racing a ton, and I just thought like, this is the only way I can do it. It's just lots of coffee, lots of carbs. I
And
realized
did you get fat?
no. Like,
And your performance and during training, your performance was, or
yeah,
during
it was,
racing.
it was good. I felt strong. I'm like, wow, I'm on like 2 hours of sleep. Not ideal, but I remember feeling stronger than I'd ever felt just because I was slamming carbs. I thought, man, there must be something to this. Imagine if I actually slept and ate these carbs. Like, I'd probably be really good. So at that point, I realized like, wow, like there's something to this. Like, I'm able to keep going on like when I'm so incredibly fatigued. And actually, I did gain a few pounds from triathlon to cycling, but it was honestly like quad muscle. It wasn't like, because I had like no quads as a triathlete, but it was
You
just,
were restricting so hard as a
yeah,
triathlete that
I lost all of my leg muscle that I gained, you know, when I was doing sprints. So yeah, it just came back in muscle mostly, and maybe a little fat.
yeah, and I would say negligible and certainly harmless amount of fat, if any.
Yeah, and it's like, honestly, it doesn't matter for me.
It
Like,
literally doesn't
it's
matter.
like, I don't look stage ready. I don't look like I have that dry like leanness
Did
that
you
like
say stage race ready?
stage ready.
Oh, like as in physique
like
sport?
physique sport. Like, I don't have that dry like physique sport stage ready like dehydrated look. But you know, that's okay. I don't need to look.
That's correct. You don't need to look like that. I want to jump into one other topic, if I can redirect for a second for our viewers. I think we both have had experience now consulting people who have never been diagnosed with disordered eating.
Or maybe have.
have.
Yeah, I have quite a few actually. that
For
have.
sure. But I think it extends, our experience with people who have been diagnosed with disordered eating also extends to those who haven't been diagnosed,
Right.
but exhibit some of the same tendencies and thought processes. And so I think that because we have so much experience working with folks, especially via email, I think that we've both amassed a lot of words, sentences, thought processes that we can sort of like raise a red flag to as soon as we see that in an email. Red flag, there might be disordered eating going on, like we need to pay attention to this. What are some of the thoughts, feelings that you have seen people in general express? And I have some too that I'll share.
I mean, of course, like one of the first ones is I've tried, you know, X, Y, and Z diet. It didn't work. You know, that's fairly normal, I would say. But then when they say I'm just like devastated by it, or it just is emotionally just so hard for me, that's definitely something that makes me ask more questions. I would say that if there are folks that show me a picture of themselves now and they look pretty lean, and then they show me a picture of like what they looked like before and they were like really lean, maybe too lean, or they show me a picture of somebody else who's like physique stage ready and they say that's what I want to look like, I'm like, okay, that's a red flag. Whenever I hear from a client, this particular part of my body is X% fat or this many millimeters of fat versus the way it used to be, the fact that they know that is kind of a red flag, especially if they're not a physique athlete. If they're a physique athlete, that's one thing, but I'm talking about endurance athletes.
Sure.
I would say that if they say, I'm very worried about carb loading, they say that straight up. If they're very worried about, I don't want to finish my carbs, or, oh, that seems like too much. And this one actually is especially with men, I've noticed, women too, but especially with men. If there's like a preoccupation with bloating, that is kind of a red flag, because there's a lot of reasons that somebody would be bloating or constipated, but a lot of times if you restrict for a long period of time and then you reintroduce food, especially certain types of foods, it can slow down GI transit time.
Oh, I want to add to that, 100% of the male clients I've had, and I've had 1,500 clients in the last 7 years, 100% of the male clients that I have had that have used the word bloating ever have had disordered eating. 100%. There's no exceptions.
Bloating happens with everybody, and women are a little bit more, I think, willing to say that.
Totally, I agree.
And it doesn't always indicate disordered eating, but with men, I've found that most often, I wouldn't say 100% of the time, but most often when those words come out of their mouth, it's like, okay, there's something else going on here. And they might just be really constipated. They might have other health issues that are causing that. But a lot of times when it goes along with the other kind of red flags, it's something to look out for. And then also with men too, that I've noticed is when they say something like, I really want to get lean, but I'm really worried about my libido. When that comes out right away, that is like a huge red flag for me. Again, like there are a lot of reasons that would be happening other than disordered eating. When combined with the other symptoms, it's definitely something that you want to like look at a little bit more in depth. I mean, loss of menstrual cycle for women, that's another one. Again, like there's multiple reasons that could be happening. When combined with other symptoms, it's something to look for.
And the reason we're trying to bring these to light is so that you can identify if maybe there are things that you're saying, thinking, feeling that indicate maybe that you should be like examining your patterns of eating, your thoughts around eating, your feelings around food. Maybe you don't have an eating disorder per se. Yeah, you may have restrictive tendencies that merit some thought, and that your life experience and your training and sport experience could be made better if you attended to them.